Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast, podcast number 202. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, January 9th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. It's been a while since I've had a guest on the show, and my guest to start out the new year, second podcast of the new year, actually, is the very informed, very respected Mr. James Greyfalcon. James, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, too.
I'll tell you how this whole thing started. And my goal to call you started on Wednesday morning. Wednesday morning, what would that be? The Wednesday morning, January the 6th, just before all the baloney in Washington, D.C. started. But my day was supposed to start out with, I was going to go to work for half a day and then take off the afternoon, and my father and I were going to go ahead and visit a guy who's going to help us on this restoration we have going on. Those of you who are fans of the podcast know that my father and I are in the process of restoring a 1951 Jaguar Mark VII that's been sitting in his garage for 55 years. Well, we're going to need some help with this, okay? So my goal was pick up my dad at noon, go see the guy, and see what the path forward was going to be, okay, on restoring this car. When I was done, I was going to call you, James, and say, hey, you want to do a podcast on state of the country moving forward into 2021, okay? But I didn't want to schedule anything until I knew what schedule I needed to follow with this guy to help with the restoration. So I get out of the meeting about my pop couldn't make it, by the way. He was under the weather. So I went by myself, got out of that meeting about 3:15, 3:20, something like that. Went to call my folks to let my dad know what transpired in the meeting. My mother answered the phone, and she informed me that the White House is under attack. Millions of people are storming the Capitol building. And I said, what? Okay, well, what the heck's going on here? Okay, thanks, Mom. I got stuff to do. I turned on the radio, and CBS News turned on to KMOX, and CBS News was doing just a terrible job of reporting. They had shrill, screaming reporters. They should have had 12-year-old girls reporting on this thing, because these people were giving no facts. It was 100% opinion. Said, well, I'm not going to learn anything here. I'm going to turn it off. So I decided to go to the source that I knew I could rely on. So I called you. And unfortunately, it went to voicemail, because I'm sure you were up to your eyeballs in everything, including your day job. So that's what we did, and that's how my Wednesday afternoon turned out. So I contacted you that evening and said, "Hey, would you like to do a podcast? I want to do this, but it'll probably transpire into that." And you graciously agreed. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I do want to talk a bit about what transpired at the Capitol building on Wednesday afternoon into Wednesday evening. But I also want to talk on the State of the Union, because to me, in my opinion, this whole mess, it's almost like it's past. And it was a little blip. It was a bunch of...
Wait, which mess?
The raiding of the Capitol building.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's done. It's past. They weren't going to take over anything.
Right.
They were not patriots. They were not freedom fighters. They were not defenders of the Constitution. In fact, what I found interesting is they were the same as the protesters and the disruptors of Black Lives Matter. They were the same as Antifa. They were exactly the same as those.
When you point that out, that's making them really upset.
Oh, I know it is.
They're getting really angry, and they're actually.
Well, tell me if I'm wrong. Am I off base on making that statement?
I think you're going easy on them. The way I'm somebody who has been very critical of critical race theory, very critical at times of Black Lives Matter and of the whole woke movement.
You have.
But I'll tell you this, everything that I saw today from Donald Trump all the way down to those people who entered that building and committed that act of terrorism, which is what it was an act of terrorism.
I agree.
They have done everything they could to vindicate everything that Black Lives Matter, the critical race theory left, says about the country and them. And when I tell them that, you know what they tell me?
What's that?
And this is the funny thing about the white left. I mean, the white right. I'm not saying every white person is conservative, but the right-wing white people who are closet ethno-nationalists, they'll sit there and they'll say all this stuff about how they don't want to see color and they want us to be race neutral. But when I point out, hey, man, I'm somebody, I don't like Joe Biden. I don't like Kamala Harris. But I absolutely reject, I think Donald Trump should be removed from office immediately. And I think those people who did that were all worse. I think they're worse than ISIS because those people grew up that way. They don't know any better. You grew up in America, like you just said earlier before when we were talking. These people, if you looked at the backgrounds of most of the people arrested, these are at least middle-class white people. Okay, and I point out race for a reason. The reason why I point out the race is because there are a lot of people who honestly just feel like they were treated completely differently than the people who were protesting racial injustice in the nation. And even before I bring that up, they say, hey, Jay, you need to be a peacemaker. Don't criticize them. We need peace. And I'm sorry, but to me, it sounds like a bunch of uptight, right-wing white people trying to use the black guy to get them out of trouble.
Well, and I
that's
saw
how it feels to me.
I saw those posts on your Facebook page, and
yeah.
I was just the reason I don't do much on Facebook. Those people just reinforce the reason I don't do much on Facebook. You put statements out there. Sometimes you put a statement out there just to see what people how people comment. Okay, which is cool. But when they throw stuff out there and they call you names, and then the biggest, they criticize you, they call you names, they talked about, well, you're just inciting more violence. You should just be embracing this and asking for peace. Well, first of all, you weren't inciting violence at all. And it's fine to ask to want to be peaceful. Okay. But here's the thing. If you break the law, you have to pay the price.
That's all I'm saying.
And that's why I say this whole thing was exactly like the Black Lives Matter protests, exactly like Antifa. And I'll tell you why. Because first of all, there were lots of protesters there. And some were peaceful. Some did not participate in this, okay?
Absolutely.
But there were some that did. And the ones that did, they certainly didn't respect the blue. They certainly didn't respect authority. And
you're talking about the Black Lives protesters?
I'm talking about. Right now I'm talking about the
Trump people,
the pro-Trump rioters. Yes.
Yeah.
But it's the same.
No, they did not.
No,
they killed an officer.
They did.
They killed a police officer.
They did. They killed one. And then they said, well, that lady was just Ashley Babbitt. She was shot in cold blood. Well, I saw the video. She was not shot in cold blood. She was shot while trying to break a door down to get into the Capitol building. I believe it was to try to get into the House chamber.
Yeah, it was a House chamber, and I saw the video where they had the guns, and there's even a guy in there that says, hey, they have guns. You should probably back off. One of the rioters. And she tries to climb into the window. Yeah. And they're probably told to do that. I mean, on the other side are the people in Congress.
Well, and again, since sticking with protocol, the officer that shot that lady, Ashley Babbitt, he's been suspended with pay pending an investigation. That's what they do. So protocol.
They always do that, and I don't know when they say suspended. That's the general standard.
That's exactly right. So
they make it like, they're trying to spin it like, well, they suspended him because he murdered her. No, whenever you kill someone, they do that. It doesn't matter if it's a good shoot or a bad shoot.
Well,
they take you.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that, and again, I compared, and you're right. I'm going to probably alienate 80% of my listening audience with this podcast. I'm going to alienate those on the far right, and I'm probably going to, hopefully I just make them angry. I don't want to alienate anyone. And I'll also, I have those on the left who listen to my podcast. I'll probably alienate them because, again, by just comparing them to Black Lives Matter and to Antifa, it's the same thing. Because after Ashley Babbitt was shot, what came out? Why, she was a good girl. She never hurt anyone. She would do anything for anyone. That's the same thing that you hear when a rioter for Antifa or a rioter for Black Lives Matter gets shot. They always say the same thing.
Well,
it's exactly the same.
And Antifa and Black Lives Matter have a different. Here's the one big difference, though. When I would say that, Black Lives Matter, where I disagree or agree with them. They're dealing with their perception of systemic racial injustice as it applies specifically to police aggression. And you can have debates. Mm-hmm. We've discussed how we feel about those figures. Mm-hmm. I agree that there's racial disparity in terms of enforcement of marijuana and force. I don't necessarily agree that there is a real racial disparity when it comes to unarmed people being shot. When you correct for all factors, it appears that race might not be a major factor in that. But there are other areas. Who's getting convicted for drugs, who's getting convicted for rape, who's getting sentences. There's no question that there's disparities. Even Ted Cruz and Rand Paul recognize that. Mm-hmm. My problem with Antifa and why I make that distinction is, so I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's ran for a guy named Jeffrey Deruba Hill. He ran for alderman in North St. Louis. He's a black guy who he walks around with an semi-automatic rifle, and he's probably the only black guy that anyone sees doing that.
Really?
He said, yeah, and he has dreadlocks. But here's the thing: he's a very pro-black, Afrocentric man. But he got the endorsement of the Oath Keepers and the Firefighters Union.
Really?
He's a guy that and here's the thing: he voted for Donald Trump.
So you can throw that stereotype out the door.
Absolutely. And even though I didn't vote for Trump, I always would support him, saying I understand where he's coming from. And the reason that he gave for voting for Trump made sense to me. And people were like, you guys are no good, blah, 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 whatever. So anyway, he basically got on and said, hey, I don't know. He said something about, he made some remark about the protesters. Mm-hmm. And I think he characterized them as poor. So I don't know exactly what he said. I don't want to put words in his mouth. Mm. But he was basically, I think he was doing like what I did. He's asking a question. And this woman gets on there, and says, she's anonymous. She's part of that anonymous group, which is kind of weird. Like, how do you have a Facebook page and you're part of anonymous?
Exactly. Well, so what does that mean?
And I'm just like, I don't care who he knows. The bottom line is what you are doing is exactly what you're accusing the right-wing people of doing, which is telling us how to talk to each other. And neither one of us are anti-white people. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Both of us are we're actually more inclined to communicate and connect with white people who don't live in South City than this woman. This woman, the only white I can tell, I know who they are. I've met them. They only interact with white people who live in South City. So it's funny how she's accusing us of being like, somewhere down the thread, she was saying me and him are anti-white. We're saying all white people are bad. I go, we never said that.
That's what most extremist groups, most extremist individuals do. They put words into someone else's mouth. They misconstrue what people say.